I adjusted the medal on my jacket one last time before stepping toward the courtroom doors when the bailiff suddenly raised his hand and said, "Ma'am, the judge has issued an instruction. You need to remove that medal before entering." For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. "My Navy Cross?" I asked quietly. He nodded with visible discomfort. The opposing counsel argued that wearing it could unfairly influence the court and generate sympathy. I looked down at the medal that had rested against my chest for years. It had survived deployments, storms, funerals, and the silent nights that followed combat. Yet here, inside a family courthouse, it was suddenly considered inappropriate. Without ugwang, without protesting, without asking anyone to recognize what it meant, I uncluppered it from my jacket, placed it carefully inside a small velvet case, and handed it to my attorney. My ex-husband smiled from across the hallway. His lawyer smiled even wider. Neither of them noticed the elderly man entering through the courthouse doors a few minutes later. The white-haired retired Admiral stopped walking the instant he saw me. His expression changed. He looked at my empty uniform jacket, then at the velvet case in my attorney's hands. His first words echoed across the silent hallway. "Commander, where is your Navy Cross?" But this story does not start here. Welcome back to Revenge Cold Stories. Drop your first name and your city in the comments and subscribe before we go any further. My name is Emily Carter. I am 42 years old, and for 20 years I served in the United States Navy. Most people who hear that immediately imagine ships, medals, ceremonies, and discipline. Very few imagine divorce court. Very few imagine custody hearings. And almost nobody imagines that the hardest battle of my life would begin years after I stopped hearing incoming fire. I grew up in Norfolk, Virginia, only 12 miles from the naval base. My father repaired diesel engines for commercial fishing boats. My mother worked night shifts as a hospital receptionist. We never had much money. Our house measured just under 1,100 square feet. 1 bathroom, 3 children. 1 old pickup truck that stalled almost every winter. My older brother Daniel was considered the smart one. My younger sister Hannah was considered the artistic one. I was simply dependable. That was the word everyone used. Not brilliant. Not talented. Dependable. When relatives visited during Thanksgiving dinners, someone always asked Daniel about school awards. Someone else praised Hannah's paintings. Then they turned toward me. "And Emily, you're still helping your father in the garage." I always smiled. Yes, nobody meant to be cruel. They simply couldn't imagine that quiet people could dream loudly. One afternoon, when I was 11, my father asked each of us to help build a wooden fence. Daniel quit after 20 minutes because he wanted to study. Hannah stopped after 30 because the paint smelled unpleasant. I stayed until sunset. When the last board was nailed into place, my father placed a rough hand on my shoulder. "You finish what you start." At the time, I thought it was an ordinary compliment. Years later, I realized it became the foundation of everything I ever accomplished. The following Monday before sunrise, my father woke me at exactly 5:15 a.m. He didn't say much. He simply handed me a thermos of coffee, mostly milk because I was still too young for real coffee, and pointed toward the old pickup truck. We drove in silence to the marina where he had agreed to help a retired Navy chief replace the engine in a 32-foot fishing boat. That morning changed my life. The retired chief's name was Walter Summons. He was 71 years old, walked with a slight limp, and wore an old Navy cap so faded that the embroidered anchor was barely visible. While my father worked underneath the engine housing, Chief Summons asked me to hand him tools. "You know the difference between a wrench and a ratchet?" he asked. "I do now," I answered. He laughed. "No, you knew because you paid attention before I asked." That sentence stayed with me for years. When we finished the repair nearly 9 hours later, he thanked my father, then looked directly at me. "Ever think about joining the Navy?" I shrugged. "I don't know if someone like me belongs there." He frowned. "What exactly is someone like you?" I couldn't answer. because I had never actually thought about it. I only knew what people around me believed. Daniel was destined for college. Henna was destined for art. Umali was dependable. Dependable people fixed things. Dependable people didn't become officers. Dependable people certainly didn't receive military decorations. Chief Summons seemed to read my thoughts. The Navy isn't looking for loud people, he said. It's looking for people who keep showing up after everyone else gets tired. That sentence quietly reshaped my future. By the time I graduated high school, I had earned a 3.92 GPA, completed more than 240 hours of community service, and worked weekends with my father for nearly 5 consecutive years. When I told relatives that I had accepted an appointment into the Naval Academy, the reactions were polite, but restrained. Daniel received applause when he entered law school. Henna received a celebration when one of her paintings won a regional competition. When I announced Annapolis, one uncle smiled awkwardly. "So, you'll be gone a lot." Another relative asked whether I would eventually quit after having children. Nobody asked why I wanted to serve. Nobody asked what it meant to me. Again, they weren't cruel. They simply couldn't imagine me becoming anything beyond dependable. The academy was harder than anything I had imagined. Plebe summer stripped away every illusion I carried into those gates. The days began before dawn. The inspections never seemed to end. The mistakes felt endless. Out of nearly 1,200 incoming midshipmen, almost everyone had been at the top of their class. Suddenly, excellence became ordinary. For the first time in my life, being dependable wasn't enough. One evening after a particularly difficult week, I seriously considered leaving. I sat alone outside Buncroft Hall, writing a letter to my parents that I never mailed. It simply read, "I don't think I'm the person they expected me to be." Before I folded the page, one of my instructors happened to walk past. Commander Rachel Hughes. She noticed the letter. "You quitting?" "I don't know." She sat beside me without saying anything for almost a minute. Finally she spoke. "Do you know why I notice you?" I assumed it was because my performance had slipped. Instead, she surprised me. "You never look for shortcuts." I smiled weakly. "I also never seem to finish first." She nodded. "Sometimes finishing first matters." She paused. "Sometimes finishing matters more." Those words reminded me of my father standing beside that wooden fence years earlier. "You finish what you start." So I stayed. Over the next 4 years, I graduated in the top 11% of my class, completed over 600 hours of leadership training, and earned recommendations that eventually led to assignments I had once believed were completely beyond my reach. Years later, during one overseas deployment, I met the man who would become my husband. His name was Michael Carter. He wasn't military. He worked as a civilian logistics contractor, assigned to support naval operations overseas. Michael was confident in a way I had never been. He could walk into a room full of strangers and know everyone's name within 15 minutes. I could spend an entire evening speaking to only 2 people. He loved that difference. Or at least he said he did. "You listen before you speak," he once told me over dinner. Most people only wait for their turn. We married 18 months later in a small ceremony attended by just 43 guests. My parents cried. Chief Summons attended despite needing a cane by then. Commander Hughes stood quietly in the second row. Everything felt hopeful. For a while it truly was. Then life became more complicated. Deployments grew longer. Michael's consulting contracts required frequent travel. When our daughter Lily was born, we promised each other that we would always make decisions together. We meant it. But promises made during peaceful seasons are tested differently when life becomes difficult. At first, the disagreements were ordinary. Who would adjust work schedules? Who would miss holidays? Who would relocate? Then they became less ordinary. Michael began saying things that sounded harmless on the surface. You've already done enough for your country. Maybe it's someone else's turn. And Lily needs a mother more than the Navy needs another officer. Each sentence by itself sounded reasonable. Together, they slowly suggested something else. That every achievement I had earned carried an expiration date. That eventually, I would need to choose between the uniform I had worked so hard to earn and the family I loved. I didn't realize then that those quiet conversations were planting the seeds of the courtroom battle that would one day begin with a judge asking me to remove the medal I had never worn for attention. Michael never demanded that I resign. That would have been easier to confront. Instead, he became a master of saying things that sounded supportive while quietly moving the finish line. If you want to stay in, I understand. Then, a few days later, I just hope Lily doesn't grow up wondering why work always came first. Lord, I'm proud of everything you've done. Followed by, I just don't know if any medal is worth missing another birthday. The words weren't shouted. They were spoken softly, usually after dinner, when the house had gone quiet and there was no audience. That made them harder to challenge. Because if I defended myself, I sounded defensive. If I stayed silent, it sounded like agreement. For nearly 6 years we lived that way. Neither of us was the villain. Neither of us was completely right. We were simply pulling in different directions while pretending we were still walking the same path. Lily noticed before either of us admitted it. She was only 9 when she asked a question that stopped me cold. Mom, why do you and Dad always whisper when I'm asleep? I looked at Michael. He looked away. Children hear far more than adults realize. A few months later, I accepted an assignment that required 12 months away, though I would return home periodically. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't the kind of assignment that appeared in newspapers. It was planning, logistics, coordination, and long hours. Most people never hear about missions like those because, when they succeed, nothing dramatic happens. Lives are protected quietly. Michael supported the decision publicly. He smiled at the farewell gathering. He hugged me before I boarded the flight. He even posted online about how proud he was. Privately, however, something had changed. Our phone conversations became shorter. Messages went unanswered. Sometimes Lily would tell me stories about school before suddenly lowering her voice. Dad says you're really busy. I am. He says you probably can't come to my music recital. My stomach tightened. I never said that. I know. She hesitated. But he already told my teacher you probably wouldn't. That conversation stayed with me through the rest of the deployment. I called more often. I rearranged meetings whenever possible. I attended one recital through a video connection at nearly 3 o'clock in the morning local time. The connection froze twice. The audio lagged behind. But I watched every minute. When Lily waved toward the camera afterward, I realized that children don't remember technical problems. They remember who tried. When I returned home 11 months later, something felt different before I even walked through the front door. The family photographs in the hallway had changed. The newer pictures mostly showed Michael and Lily together. Camping trips, school events, birthday parties. I wasn't missing because I hadn't attended. I was missing because the photographs had been selected without me. It was a small thing. Small things often reveal larger truths. Over the next year, counseling came and went. We attended 18 sessions. Some were hopeful. Others ended with silence during the drive home. Our counselor once asked us a simple question. When did you stop assuming the best about each other? Neither of us answered. Because neither of us knew. Trust rarely disappears in a single moment. It erodes one ordinary misunderstanding at a time. Eventually, we separated. The divorce itself was respectful. Painful, but respectful. The real conflict began afterward. Custody. Michael believed Lily needed stability. I agreed. He believed stability meant living primarily with him, because my career had involved deployments. I believed stability meant having two parents who remained equally present whenever possible. Neither of us questioned how much the other loved our daughter. We questioned what love should look like. Those are very different arguments. At first, mediation seemed promising. We spent 23 hours across 6 meetings discussing schedules, holidays, education, and medical decisions. We reached agreement on almost everything. Then one issue collapsed the negotiations. Primary custody. Michael wouldn't compromise. His attorney, Richard Lawson, was known throughout the county for family law. Prepared, calm, persuasive. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. His arguments sounded reasonable because they were built on carefully selected facts. Commander Emily Carter had deployed multiple times. Correct. Commander Emily Carter had missed birthdays. Correct. Commander Emily Carter's career required long and unpredictable hours. Also correct. What those facts didn't show was every school project completed together afterward. Every late-night homework session. Every weekend spent making up for lost time. Every promise kept. Facts without context can create a convincing story. Just not always the complete one. 3 weeks before trial, my attorney spread several folders across her conference table. Her name was Jennifer Brooks. She had practiced family law for nearly 19 years. I need to prepare you, she said. For what? They're going to make this about your identity. I frowned. What does that mean? They can't argue that you don't love Lily. They know that won't work. So instead, they'll suggest you've built your entire identity around military achievement. She paused before continuing. They'll imply that everything, even your service, becomes a performance. I stared at her. That's absurd. I know. But absurd arguments sometimes succeed if they're presented carefully. She slid another document toward me. It contained a list of exhibits the opposing side intended to reference. Photographs, awards, service records, public commendations, even interviews I'd given years earlier about veterans' charities. They're using all of this. Jennifer nodded. They'll argue you enjoy public admiration. I almost laughed. Anyone who had actually served beside me would have found that accusation ridiculous. Recognition had never been the goal. Most of my proudest moments had no cameras. No speeches. No applause. Only teammates doing difficult work together. Still, accusations don't have to be true to become exhausting. The evening before the hearing, I opened the small wooden box where I kept my service decorations. I rarely looked at them. Not because they weren't meaningful. Because they represented people. Friends. Mentors. Those who came home. Those who didn't. The Navy Cross rested in its velvet case. Whenever people asked about it, I usually changed the subject. Some stories belong to more than one person. Those stories deserve privacy. Lily walked into the room quietly. She was 12 now. Old enough to understand more than adults sometimes realized. She looked at the medal. Are you wearing that tomorrow? I was thinking about it. Why? I considered the question. Because it reminds me who I am. She nodded thoughtfully. Then she asked something I never forgot. Does it remind you? Nor other people's? I closed the case gently. I hope just me. She smiled. Then it probably doesn't matter whether anyone else sees it. Children sometimes arrive at wisdom adults spend decades chasing. The next morning, I placed the medal on my uniform anyway. Not to impress anyone. Not to influence anyone. Simply because it had always been part of the formal uniform I had earned the right to wear. I had no idea that within an hour I would be standing in a courthouse hallway, quietly removing it at the request of a judge, setting in motion a chain of events that none of us, least of all my ex-husband or his attorney, could possibly have anticipated. I arrived at the courthouse at exactly 8:07 a.m. The hearing wasn't scheduled until 9, but years in the Navy had made punctuality feel almost automatic. Jennifer was already waiting near the security checkpoint with 2 thick binders tucked under her arm and a paper cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. "You slept?" she asked. "Enough." She smiled faintly. "That's attorney language for probably not. It works for Navy officers too." For a moment we both laughed. It was the last relaxed moment either of us would have that morning. Security was routine. Identification. Metal detector. Briefcase inspection. Then one of the deputies approached us with an uncertain expression. "Commander Carter." "Yes." "The judge has reviewed the pretrial motions." Jennifer immediately became alert. "Is there a problem?" The deputy shifted uncomfortably. "Counsel for Mr. Carter argued that the military medal you're wearing could prejudice the proceedings." Jennifer frowned. "Prejudice?" "He argued it might generate sympathy before testimony even begins." The deputy clearly disliked delivering the message. He requested that the medal not be displayed in court. Jennifer opened her mouth to object. I gently touched her sleeve. "It's all right." "No, Emily, this isn't." "It's all right." The deputy looked relieved. "I'm sorry." "You don't have to apologize," I said calmly. "You're doing your job." I unclipped the medal with slow, careful movements. Not because I was emotional. Because I had always handled it carefully. Jennifer opened her briefcase. Inside was the same velvet case I had used for years. I placed the medal inside. She closed the lid. Neither of us said another word. Across the hallway, Michael stood beside Richard Lawson. Michael looked almost uncomfortable. Richard did not. He adjusted his tie, glanced briefly toward the velvet case and whispered something to Michael. I couldn't hear the words. I didn't need to. His expression said enough. He believed he had already won the morning. As we waited for the courtroom doors to open, people continued arriving. Parents, attorneys, court staff, children holding coloring books. The ordinary rhythm of family court. Nobody paid any attention to me. Exactly the way I preferred. Then at approximately 8:41 a.m. the atmosphere changed. An elderly gentleman entered through the main hallway, wearing a dark navy blazer with a small gold anchor pin on the lapel. His posture remained remarkably straight despite his age. White hair, measured steps, sharp blue eyes that seemed to notice everything. 2 younger officers accompanied him, though they remained respectfully several paces behind. I assumed he was there for an unrelated ceremony. He certainly wasn't expected in our courtroom. As he walked past, his eyes briefly met mine. Then they dropped to my uniform. He stopped. Completely. His expression shifted from polite curiosity to unmistakable recognition. He turned fully toward me. Commander Emily Carter. I blinked. Yes, sir. He smiled warmly. I thought so. Before I could respond, his eyes searched my jacket again. His smile disappeared. Where is your Navy Cross? The hallway fell strangely quiet. Jennifer looked at me. I glanced toward the velvet case. The court requested that I remove it before entering. His eyebrows rose. They requested what? I answered simply. Opposing counsel believed it might influence the proceedings. For several seconds he said nothing. Not because he was angry. Because he appeared genuinely stunned. Finally he extended his hand. Admiral Thomas Reynolds, retired. I immediately recognized the name. During my career, Admiral Reynolds had commanded one of the Navy's largest operational fleets. His leadership courses were still studied. His speeches were quoted. I'd met him only once, years earlier, at a formal ceremony attended by hundreds of service members. I never imagined he would remember me. Yet he did. Sir, I said quietly. It's good to see you again. He shook my hand firmly. It is good to see you too, Commander. Then he looked directly at Jennifer. May I ask why Commander Carter is in family court? Jennifer hesitated. It's a custody hearing. I see. His voice remained calm. And someone believes that wearing a lawfully earned military decoration is somehow unfair. Jennifer chose her words carefully. That appears to be opposing counsel's position. The Admiral looked toward the closed courtroom doors. Then back at me. You removed it without argument. Yes, sir. Why? Because the hearing isn't about me. He studied my face for a long moment. Then very quietly, almost to himself, he said, That answer explains exactly why you earned it. I felt my throat tighten. Not because he had praised me. Because he understood. Before I could reply, the courtroom doors opened. The bailiff called everyone inside. People began filing toward their assigned seats. The Admiral turned to leave. Then he paused. Commander. Yes, sir. If the court has questions about your character. He smiled gently. I happen to have a few answers. Without another word, he walked toward the gallery. Neither Michael nor Richard Lawson recognized him immediately. But several older attorneys did. I watched their expressions change. One quietly whispered another's name. Heads began turning. The courtroom, which had felt ordinary only moments earlier, suddenly carried an entirely different energy. And for the first time that morning, Richard Lawson's confidence seemed to waver. The courtroom settled into an uneasy silence as everyone took their seats. Family court rarely has dramatic entrances. Most hearings begin with paperwork, quiet conversations between attorneys, and the soft shuffle of people waiting for their names to be called. That morning felt different. Not because anyone had raised their voice. Because people were suddenly paying closer attention. Judge Elena Whitmore entered at precisely 9:00 a.m. Good morning. Everyone stood. Please be seated. She reviewed the docket, confirmed appearances, and looked over the stack of motions on her bench. Commander Carter, Mr. Carter. Both of us acknowledged her. Judge Whitmore was known for being exceptionally prepared. She had spent nearly 26 years on the bench and had a reputation for making custody decisions based on evidence rather than emotion. That was one reason I respected her. The hearing began exactly as Jennifer had predicted. Richard Lawson stood first. His tone was measured. Your Honor, this matter is not about whether Commander Carter is an honorable individual. A brief pause. It is about whether her lifestyle consistently serves the best interests of a 12-year-old child. That sounded reasonable. Because it was. Custody hearings are supposed to focus on children. He displayed calendars documenting deployments, travel schedules, duty assignments, training records. Every document was genuine. Every date was accurate. Yet, as Jennifer had warned me, the collection of facts created a story that wasn't entirely complete. Commander Carter has served her nation with distinction, Richard continued. No one disputes that. He turned toward me briefly before facing the judge again. But military excellence does not automatically translate into parental availability. Availability. One carefully chosen word. He wasn't accusing me of neglect. He wasn't attacking my character. He was simply inviting the court to compare hours. Birthdays attended. School mornings. Parent-teacher conferences. Soccer practices. He knew numbers could quietly outweigh intentions. Jennifer stood when it was her turn. She didn't object to the facts. Instead, she added context. Your Honor, every deployment cited by opposing counsel was completed with advance family planning. She presented school records, video call logs, letters, travel receipts, evidence showing that I had flown across the country more than 30 times during leave periods, simply to spend weekends with Lily. Not because anyone ordered me to. Because I wanted to. Judge Whitmore listened without interruption. Occasionally she asked questions. Never argumentative. Always precise. Commander Carter, after your final deployment, how many overnight duty assignments have you accepted? 3 in the past 21 months, Your Honor. And before that? None. She made another note. Richard then shifted strategies. Instead of discussing schedules, he began discussing identity. Commander Carter's military accomplishments are extraordinary. Again, true. However, there is concern that those accomplishments have become central to how she wishes to be perceived. Jennifer immediately objected. Speculation. Sustained, the judge replied. Richard nodded respectfully. Then I'll rephrase. He picked up several photographs. Each showed me at veterans' charity events, scholarship ceremonies, memorial services. One photograph even showed me speaking to high school students about leadership. Commander Carter frequently appears in public wearing her uniform. Jennifer remained seated this time. She knew the photographs were authentic. Richard continued. Would you agree that your military service occupies a significant part of your public identity? I answered honestly. Yes. And your personal identity? I thought for only a second. No. He looked surprised. No. What is your personal identity? I smiled faintly. Lily's mother. The courtroom became very quiet. Richard paused before asking another question. So if your service ended tomorrow? My answer wouldn't change. He slowly placed the photographs back onto counsel table. That wasn't the response he expected. He moved on. Nearly 2 hours into the hearing, Judge Whitmore requested a short recess. People stretched. Attorneys reviewed notes. The court reporter stepped outside. I remained seated. Jennifer leaned toward me. You're doing well. I don't know. You don't need to know. She smiled. The judge does. Across the room, Michael was speaking quietly with Richard. He glanced toward me only once. Not angrily. Almost thoughtfully. For the first time since the divorce proceedings began, he didn't look certain. Then something unexpected happened. During the recess, Admiral Reynolds quietly approached Jennifer. He didn't interrupt. He simply asked, has either party called character witnesses? Jennifer shook her head. No. May I speak with you for a moment? They stepped into the hallway. I remained inside. Several minutes later, Jennifer returned looking different. Calmer. Confident. What happened? I asked. She smiled. The Admiral asked whether I'd consider calling him as a rebuttal witness. I blinked. Can we do that? If the judge allows it. I never asked him. I know. He volunteered. My first instinct was to decline. This case shouldn't become about military recognition. Jennifer nodded. He agrees. Then why testify? She answered with a sentence I never forgot. Because he said the issue is no longer the medal. It's about what removing it implied. Before I could respond, the bailiff announced that court was back in session. Everyone returned to their seats. Judge Whitmore resumed the hearing. Jennifer stood. Your Honor, the defense requests permission to call one additional rebuttal witness, whose presence this morning was entirely unexpected. Richard frowned. Who? Jennifer answered. Retired Admiral Thomas Reynolds. The courtroom became completely silent. Even Judge Whitmore looked up from her notes. Admiral Reynolds is present. The elderly officer quietly stood from the gallery. Yes, Your Honor. The judge studied him for a moment, then addressed Richard. Any objection? Richard hesitated. He clearly hadn't anticipated this. Finally he answered. No legal objection. Very well. The Admiral walked slowly to the witness stand. He took the oath with the same calm dignity he had carried in the hallway. Jennifer approached. Admiral Reynolds, how long did you serve in the United States Navy? 43 years. And do you know Commander Emily Carter? I do. How long have you known her? Approximately 14 years. Jennifer nodded. Can you explain the nature of that relationship? The Admiral smiled gently. I was never her commanding officer. I observed her career from a distance. Then, on several occasions, I reviewed operational reports involving missions in which she served. Richard remained still, listening carefully. Jennifer asked one more question. Admiral, when you entered the courthouse this morning, what caused you to stop? The Admiral looked toward me, then toward the judge. I noticed that Commander Carter's uniform was incomplete. What do you mean? I knew she had earned the Navy Cross. I also knew she would never voluntarily remove it from a formal uniform unless someone had requested it. Jennifer paused. And what did you learn? That opposing counsel believed displaying the decoration might create sympathy. Did that concern you? The Admiral answered without hesitation. No, it saddened me. Judge Whitmore leaned forward slightly. Why saddened it? The Admiral's response filled the courtroom without ever becoming louder. Because in 43 years of military service, I learned that the people least interested in displaying medals are usually the ones who sacrifice the most to earn them. No one spoke. No one moved. Even Richard Lawson didn't interrupt. The courtroom wasn't reacting to the prestige of a retired admiral. It was reacting to the quiet certainty of a man who had spent a lifetime judging character, and who, without attacking anyone, had just changed the direction of the entire hearing. The silence lasted several seconds. In a courtroom, a few seconds can feel much longer. Judge Whitmore looked down at her notes before lifting her eyes toward Admiral Reynolds again. Admiral, she said, this court is not evaluating military service. We're determining the best interests of a child. I understand completely, Your Honor, he replied. And I appreciate that distinction. His answer was immediate. Respectful. There wasn't even a hint of disagreement. Jennifer stood quietly, allowing him to continue. The reason I asked to testify has very little to do with Commander Carter's military career. Judge Whitmore folded her hands. Please explain. I heard outside this courtroom that Commander Carter was instructed to remove her Navy Cross because it might generate sympathy. He glanced briefly toward me. When I asked why she complied, she answered, because the hearing isn't about me. He paused. In my experience, that sentence reveals far more about a person's character than the medal itself. Richard Lawson rose slowly. Your Honor, may I cross-examine? You may. Richard approached the witness stand with the same calm professionalism he had maintained all morning. Admiral Reynolds, good morning. Good morning. You've clearly had an extraordinary career. Thank you. But you are not a child psychologist. No. You are not a family counselor. No. And you've never lived inside the Carter household. I have not. Richard nodded. So your testimony today is limited to Commander Carter's military character. The Admiral smiled faintly. No. Richard looked surprised. No. My testimony concerns judgment. He continued before Richard could ask another question. I've spent decades evaluating people placed under enormous pressure. I've watched officers make decisions when frightened. I've watched leaders accept blame they didn't deserve. And I've watched others seek recognition they hadn't earned. The courtroom remained completely still. Commander Carter belongs to the first group. Richard changed direction. Would you agree that military excellence doesn't necessarily predict parenting ability? Absolutely. So receiving a Navy Cross does not make someone a better mother? Correct. Richard seemed encouraged. Then why mention the medal at all? The Admiral answered gently. I didn't. Richard blinked. You asked where it was. I asked because it was missing. He leaned slightly forward. The important part wasn't the decoration. It was her willingness to remove it without complaint. Another pause. That tells me something about priorities. Richard was too experienced to argue with a witness unnecessarily. Instead, he shifted toward something more practical. Admiral, are you aware that Commander Carter spent many months away from home during deployments? Yes. And that Lily missed her mother during those periods? I'm certain she did. So those sacrifices affected the child? They affected the entire family. Richard nodded. No further questions. The cross-examination had been respectful, professional. Neither side had tried to embarrass the other. Judge Whitmore thanked the Admiral. As he stepped down from the witness stand, he walked past my table. Without stopping, without making a scene, he quietly said only 4 words. I'm proud of you. Then he returned to the gallery. Those 4 words meant more than applause ever could. The hearing continued for another hour. Additional financial documents were reviewed. School attendance records. Medical appointments. Teacher statements. Everything the court needed to understand Lily's daily life. Then Judge Whitmore did something neither attorney expected. She looked directly at Lily's guardian ad litem. Counselor, you've spent time with both parents separately. Yes, Your Honor. You've visited both homes. I have. What observation has stayed with you the most? The counselor considered her answer carefully. Both parents love Lily. I don't question that. She paused. But they express that love differently. Judge Whitmore nodded. Explain. Mr. Carter builds routines. Commander Carter builds confidence. The courtroom became quiet again. The counselor continued. When Lily talks about her father, and she describes safety. When she talks about her mother, and she describes possibility. She smiled softly. The healthiest children usually need both. I noticed Michael looking down at the table. Not in shame. In reflection. For the first time since our separation, I sensed that he wasn't listening like an opponent. He was listening like a father. Closing arguments began shortly. Rich,